China and the United States have agreed to a new reciprocal visa policy for tourists and business travelers. For more on this and other key developments out of APEC, let's go to Dali Yang. He's a political science professor at the University of Chicago. Professor, thanks for being on the program.
It's my pleasure.
So let's talk about this visa deal. How significant is this? And some, in fact, have called it a game changer. Would you agree?
Well, it's certainly a significant development. For many years, in fact, for some years now, the U.S. has offered to allow Chinese visitors to the U.S. to have longer-term visas, and the Chinese have agreed to do so. The U.S. today only gets probably around 2% of the global tourist traffic out of China. So for that alone, this boosting of the visits from Chinese would help boost the U.S. economy. At the same time, of course, American travelers to China would also be able to actually have more longer-term multi-entry visas. So all of this actually should be good in boosting the relations between the two sides, make the travel easier, and of course enhance the kind of people-to-people relations between the two countries.
So, Professor Yang, is it safe to say this could lay the groundwork for improved bilateral relations in other areas like trade, economic cooperation, cybersecurity?
Well, it does help. Of course, it's just one area, one aspect of this overall and complicated relationship. But whenever you set the tone in such a way, it's actually a very positive tone to thinking that actually the U.S. and China in many ways can work together rather than try to actually work against each other.
Which country has more to gain from this deal, China or the United States?
Well, of course, whenever you have a reciprocal relationship, both sides would gain. But for the moment, actually, there are many more Chinese who are actually eager to come to the U.S. And there are sheer numbers. In fact, China would be sending out more and more tourists. So for that reason alone, the U.S. actually stands to gain a little bit more.
Professor, what about as far as their bilateral meeting between President Xi Jinping and Obama? Can they make substantial headway here on sensitive issues that are dividing these two nations?
Well, they are not going to resolve all the issues on the docket, but nonetheless, every time they meet, already actually there are staff members and others who are working on all sorts of issues. So generally speaking, there will be some positive moves ahead. And already with the visa issue, but I would anticipate that there would be other issues. And of course, meeting each other regularly is important to maintaining the momentum to the relations between the two sides. At the same time, already the Chinese behavior, for example, China's frosty relationship with North Korea in itself is actually a welcome sign that the U.S. and China can work together on the issue, for example, of the DPRK and other issues too.
Earlier you mentioned the relationship between U.S. and China. You described it as complicated. Why do you think that is? Why is this relationship complicated?
Well, there are, of course, the two sides have a lot of agreements. There are many issues where the U.S. and China work together already. And in fact, in many ways, in terms of the global governance issues, the climate, the global security issues, weapons of mass destruction, and so on, you really cannot do it without both of them working together. But at the same time, as China rises so rapidly, as Chinese behavior has caused certain kind of uneasiness in the region, of course, there is a little testiness from time to time. But I think that's why it's so important for the top leaders from the two countries to work with each other, to talk together, and to try to resolve some of those issues, and certainly to remove some of those issues from the list of the kind of challenging issues, if possible.
And speaking of challenging, what do you think Beijing wants to see from Washington? What do they want from the United States and this APEC meeting?
Well, the most important issue for the Chinese is the suspicion to what extent the U.S. may be working against China in terms of seeking to contain China. Any assurance the U.S. can offer that the U.S. welcomes a prosperous and growing China, that actually there is room for both countries in the bigger Pacific Ocean area, that's certainly welcome. And I think over time, they have to learn to work with each other. And at the same time, the effort by the Chinese and the Japanese, for example, to have a more stable relationship already eases some of the concerns on the part of the U.S. So I think actually this process of building trust between the two sides would help, and the Chinese would welcome sort of gestures on the part of the U.S. To ease their sort of uneasiness. And of course, any effort to perhaps to work together in terms of cybersecurity and other issues would also help to alleviate some of the concerns.
Working together to build trust. Thank you very much, Professor Dali Yang, joining us from Chicago.